So, back in the early 1990s, Nintendo looked at their most successful arcade game and said, we haven't made another one of those in a couple of years, and decided to make one, called Donkey Kong Country. It was one of the first reboots of classic games, and it made a lot of sense for Nintendo, not to mention a lot of money for Nintendo, to put a new spin on a classic arcade game from the 1980s. Other companies with classic licenses, like Pong or Frogger or Pac-Man, followed suit. Another one of those was Space Invaders, rebooted in 2003 by Taito as Space Raiders. The creation of Space Raiders comes out of one of two probable things. Number 1, a desire to really go back and reconsider and expand upon what was one of the most important games of all time. To really figure out what made the game great at its core and create an enthralling storyline around it, so that they could adapt a classic to a willing modern era. Or number 2, greed. Go ahead and take a guess. Find a piece of paper near you and write down which number you think it is. Fold it, place it near you somewhere, forget about it until I bring it up later. But about the game, it plays like the original, but instead of a ship, you're a guy, and instead of a bunch of the same iconic sprite, you get a bunch of forgettable, stereotypical alien things. They make the iconic sound effects, which is actually pretty cool. But just who gives a shit, really? I mean, for every good point that this game gets, I just see something else lazy and boring to replace it. For instance, these alien designs. They aren't even aesthetically interesting, and after a while shooting identical aliens, I just stopped caring about what they looked like. The biggest problem with Space Raiders comes from something that should be a sin when it comes to GameCube games. Monotony. There's nothing different, nothing new as the game goes on, just shooting the same aliens for minutes on end. I'd hate to see what one of those high-skill highlight videos, what with the techno music and the slow motion would look like for this shit. Now, monotony used to be pretty common in NES and Atari games back when you were just looking for a high score in most games, but here the score doesn't even matter. Here you're just trying to get to the end to play through the story. Even if the story is pretty decent, which, might I add, it isn't, the tedium of playing through essentially the same game level after level after level would really easily take away any real interest, which it did. Ultimately, this reboot doesn't work because it's a reboot, or to make it simpler, this doesn't need to be a GameCube game. Space Raiders probably could have worked as an arcade game. In fact, it did work as an arcade game, made well over $400 million in the 1980s. But the gameplay is so outdated, and not to mention you don't have to go back after you die, so there's no consequence either. I can't stand this game because it's pointless, and it does almost nothing with the source material. That's probably the most disappointing aspect of it. There's so little effort in attempting to make any sort of expansion upon the original game's foundation. It's almost like the creators were just greedy.